So I'm going to be talking about impacts of climate change on cultural heritage, which might seem like I'm a bit far removed from what you've heard so far, but I think there are some links there if you look hard. I want to acknowledge my co-authors, who are Colin Dunlop from Dara in Northern Ireland, Anthony Firth from Historic England, who, as Paul mentioned, is with us today, Helen Jay from the National Trust, who provided a case study for us, and Julian Whitewright from the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. Now, I would also like to acknowledge the co-authors of the previous review in 2020, which was led by my former colleague David Harkin, who's now with Network Rail. They provided a really good basis for our review, but there are changes, as I will explain. So in terms of key messages, what's already happening? As I'm sure you're aware, climate change can exacerbate the natural rates of decay, and this affects cultural heritage as much as other sectors. So these damaging impacts of climate change have already been observed at a range of heritage assets. Many coastal heritage assets in the UK are currently at risk from coastal processes and flooding, but climate change is increasing this risk. These do include sites managed as visitor attractions. Often the awareness of heritage is around tourism, but it also affects many other designated and undesignated heritage assets, the vast majority of which are in private ownership. And I would stress that those heritage assets may well include the home that you live in. So there is a huge range that makes up the historic environment. In terms of what could happen in the future, heritage assets located in the coastal zone will be subjected to enhanced rates of erosion, increased flooding, and changes in weathering patterns as a direct result of climate change. The erosion processes that in some cases result in loss will also result in new discoveries. So I think that's quite an important point to make. Submerged sites in particular will be adversely affected by changes in ocean pH, temperature and circulation patterns. It's worth noting that submerged sites are often effectively artificial reefs. They provide a rich habitat for marine life and support fish, invertebrates and algae. So that traditional distinction between natural heritage and cultural heritage really starts to break down here. I thought to bring this alive, I'm kind of aware that a lot of people in the audience may not be heritage professionals, and this may all be quite new. So I've pulled out some of the case studies from our review, which I'll go through quite briefly just to give you an idea. The first one is Skara Brae, which is the best preserved Neolithic settlement in Western Europe. It's a scheduled monument. It's a property in care, which is looked after by Historic Environment Scotland, and it's also part of the Heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site. It was actually uncovered during a series of storms in the 1850s, and a seawall was built when it came into state care in the 1920s. So this has been protecting the site for nearly 100 years, but it has been exacerbating erosion on either side of the seawall. We have been undertaking terrestrial laser scanning monitoring since 2010, so we've started to build up a really detailed picture of erosion and accretion at this site. We've also undertaken a climate vulnerability index assessment and identified a high vulnerability of the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. Through the Scottish Government project Dynamic Coast, we have also carried out much more detailed work, which is available in a Dynamic Coast case study on the dynamiccoast.com website, but this shows that erosion will continue and it will increase in rate and extent. So Dynamic Coast has suggested that we need to take a dual approach to conservation and maintenance, a combination of managed retreat combined with improvements to our existing sea defences and looking at nature-based solutions, such as working with the natural processes on the beach. Our second case study is Cherish, which is an EU-funded project uniting Ireland and Wales. It's been coordinated by the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, and it completed earlier on this year, although dissemination is still very much ongoing. So it's been raising awareness and understanding of the past, present and future impacts of climate change. And it has focused on a series of case studies to demonstrate the application of different techniques in terms of recording and monitoring. So the example in the photograph is Dinistintly in Wales, which I actually was fortunate to visit with the Cherish team last week with the British Irish Council. There has been baseline data collected for the chosen sites, and this is being followed up with monitoring. So the outputs include guidance and a toolkit, which can be downloaded from the Cherish project website. And the learnings and methodologies are now being implemented by the Welsh Royal Commission in intertidal and coastal sites. The third case study, which I really wanted to bring in to show that the development of adaptation solutions is already ongoing. This is Links of Noteland, which is again in Orkney in the extreme north of Scotland. It's a Neolithic, Bronze Age and early Iron Age settlement site, which has been beautifully preserved underneath a dune system. However, it has been affected by severe wind erosion, and this has resulted in various interventions over the last decades, particularly since 2011. So we've had monitoring, assessment, targeted excavation and landscape consolidation. The work since 2011 has included recharging of the dunes and planting of marram and lime grasses to stabilise and encourage the growth of new dunes. So this has turned out to be a very effective way of protecting the surviving archaeological remains through a nature-based solution. So the photograph is of my colleagues in the Monument Conservation Unit planting those grasses. Moving on to our confidence assessment, this has changed slightly since last time. It's still in the medium range, but we have a higher level of agreement or consensus, which really reflects the level of partnership working that's been going on the last few years. So since the last review, there has been a marked increase in the amount of baseline data collected for the UK coastline. Regional government heritage bodies and non-government heritage organisations have been analysing the data and providing initial assessments of the potential climate change impacts on coastal heritage assets. Few sites have had the intensive level of monitoring that I've just described for Skara Brae, so we need to bear that in mind, and it's not realistic to monitor every site in that level of detail. So the broader landscape scale studies are also extremely important. Given the complex nature of coastal processes, these surveys need to be repeated over the next few years to allow for a more detailed and nuanced understanding of what's actually going on. In terms of what could happen in the future, we've stayed the same on this. There is more evidence that needs to be collected, and the level of agreement or consensus will develop as that happens. It's only through repeat assessments that it will be possible to quantify the effect of climate change, and the level of detailed understanding does still vary from region and country to country. So this ongoing monitoring and research will allow for projections of future impact and change, and for the development of appropriate adaptation measures. Having said that, baseline data for offshore fully submerged heritage sites like shipwrecks is lacking. We have much less data in that zone, so there is more that needs to be done. In terms of key challenges and emerging issues, we have 3 points to make here, really, which follow up on things I've already said. One is around developing approaches to the management of heritage assets that acknowledges the possibility of transformation and adaptive release, as well as loss and decay. So this is looking beyond the concept of curated decay to looking at different ways that we can release the potential of assets that are under threat. So that there is a lot of work going on that at the moment, particularly by Historic England, and I would commend that to you. There needs to be, as I've explained, further long-term monitoring to understand what's going on, and quantification of the impact of multiple climate threats and the cumulative impact that they have on heritage assets. So I should mention that the photograph here is Hurst Castle in Hampshire, which suffered a serious collapse, and the photo shows some stabilisation measures already in place. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That was a bit of a race through, but hopefully you'll follow that up by reading the report and following up the links to some of the amazing partnership projects that are taking place across the UK and Ireland.